Next up, we have Dr. Andrew Aldrin. He's currently the director of the Aldrin Space Institute at Florida Institute of Technology. ASI is a multidisciplinary institute created to advance commercial space development. Dr. Aldrin is also director of the ISU Center for Space Entrepreneurship at Florida Tech and the Sino-U.S. Space Policy Research Center. His distinguished background includes senior positions at ULA, Boeing's NASA Systems, the RAND Corporation, and the Institute for Defense Analyses. Andy, thank you so much for being here today.
Okay, so my turn. Okay, thanks, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here. I jumped in at the tail end of Jared and Laura's conversation. That was fantastic. And actually, Laura was hanging out with us a little bit at the very origins of ASI, and it's great to see her still in the community. Michael, I do want to start out. I know we have some things we want to talk about, but I do want to jump in on the public-private partnerships because, like many things, I have strong opinions, but there's something that I think is useful to talk about because it is really complex. And Jared did a great job of kind of getting into the complexity, and we tend to be really arbitrary about it. And there are lots of different ways of slicing it. One of the ways that I like to, and it's certainly not the only way, but it's useful, is that fundamentally a partnership is about risk sharing. Public-private partnerships are about risk sharing. And so if you start to deconstruct those risks and understand which side has which kind of risk, it's a useful way of kind of gauging and balancing the partnerships. And without getting into the details of how you sort of deconstruct those things, I would just say that it's fairly obvious in some cases where we get the risk out of balance, and invariably those partnerships don't work very well, whether it's industry taking on too much risk or government taking on too much risk. It doesn't work, and we find that. And so I think the trick is, and it's not the only trick, but one of the tricks to making these public-private partnerships work is coming up with the right balance. Now, the challenge is that industry and government don't see risks the same way. And there are lots of occasions in which things that are great for industry to reduce risks are really bad for government. And so it's not easy, and it's called negotiation, right? But that's one useful way of looking at it. And I would just, suggest, I just wanted to kind of add that to the last conversation. I know we have lots of stuff to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm glad you did that. Michael, did you want to come on as well?
You take it for the beginning, and I'll come in.
Okay, you guys are going to double team me here. This is great.
So earlier in the conversation with Laura and Jared, we talked about the Sino-U.S. Space Policy Research Center, the difference between how governments treat interaction with China and how commercial companies can do so, and the pros and cons there, and the different reasons for taking on different types of risks in foreign policy. Can you talk a little bit about your decision to form the Sino-U.S. Space Policy Research Center and how that's taking on this problem?
Yeah, so we just this actually happened a few years ago, and it was actually about the same time both I and the president of the university had run across various people in China who were very interested in cooperating, and actually this was an initiative on the part of the president of the university. But to be perfectly honest, while it all started with great intentions, and I actually brought a delegation of students out to the Beijing Institute of Technology, and we spent a couple of weeks looking at facilities, but also having seminars, mostly kind of dealing with, not surprisingly, policy and law issues. Subsequent to that, U.S.-China relations really haven't supported a whole lot of interaction. So I think it started with the best of intentions. They're good intentions, I think, remaining on both sides, but the political atmosphere isn't really supporting much. So that's what's happened with the Institute. I probably still have opinions about U.S. and China and different ways of approaching, and I think that, to be sure, China is becoming a very interesting player in commercial space. but very different, right? And obviously what it means to be commercial is really different in China than it is in the US. And I'm not sure how much that means. And that's not a passive aggressive, I'm not sure. That's just genuinely, I don't know that it matters whether it's a state-owned company or a purely commercial company. They're both competing in the space arena.
Can you address a little bit about the quality of STEM education and workforce preparation in China versus the United States? And then compare that to innovation capabilities, right? It seems as though China has better STEM education and workforce development, but still lags in innovation. Just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so it would be, I'm far from an expert on STEM education and innovation in China. I would just posit that I think we tend to have, like with the Soviet Union before, which is, you know, frankly, what I grew up studying the Soviet Union. I actually wrote my dissertation on how the Soviets beat us into space. I see a lot of parallels. I also see a lot of, obviously there are massive differences between the two. I think that we tend to overstate the quality of STEM education in China and understate the amount of innovation that really happens. And honestly, beyond, if I go much beyond that, I'm out of my depth. And as I said, I haven't been spending any time there, so I can't really tell you a whole lot other than a couple of trips that I've made. So what I will say about education here, because I think it's a really, really critical point, and this probably applies to China as well. In fact, I'm pretty sure it does, is that we do a great job of training engineers. And I think in the United States, we train the best engineers, particularly aerospace engineers in the world. Unquestionably. We do a less good job of training people to be leaders, and certainly not a very good job at all of training them to be entrepreneurs. And in the future, the future that kids that are in school, young adults, some not so young adults that are in school today are going to face is so different from what we faced in the past. You know, I like to say, this is not my father's space program anymore. Yeah. It isn't. You know, instead of it taking decades and billions of dollars to build systems, we're literally building them in months in some cases. And there are things that are getting flown for thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it is changed by orders of magnitude. And in some cases, you're comparing apples and oranges, but just one thing, this is kind of one of these fun fact, stupid things, but I mean, Surveyor was $600 million in today's dollars. And if you just compare that to Eclipse mission, it is an order of magnitude more money and probably an order of magnitude less capability, right? Mm-hmm. So those are the kinds of changes that are happening. And that's a sort of, going to the moon is hard. When you start talking about things like Earth observation, you take planets, you know, dove loaves of bread, right? And compare those to Landsat. It's, you know, you get several orders of magnitude, but I'm not sure you're really getting apples to apples. But the point is, instead of taking decades and billions, it takes orders of magnitude less time. The other things are, you know, I grew up with a customer set of about 3, maybe 4 if you count, you know, some of the big commercial space operators, satellite operators. You could get to 10. But today, you know, and you could look at a company like Planet or other Earth observation companies that have literally thousands of customers. And the same holds true for the number of investors. You basically had a few government agencies in the past. Maybe you could get some corporate investment, and now you've got investment coming from across the entire investment spectrum, hundreds of different investors. And we're not even starting to talk about SPACs yet.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother topic. The point is, the clock speeds today are so much faster, and there's so much more capability, and there's so much more happening than what happened in the past, that I think we really need to be rethinking it. The kind of education we have, and it's certainly not enough just to be a good scientist or a good engineer.
Yeah, talk a little bit about, I'm really interested in that growth trend. So it feels like we're going to be exponentially growing. I'm sure there'll be hiccups in that. What are the key growing pains that you see the industry experiencing, besides the usual space debris discussion?
What are the chasms we have to jump, really? One of them, I think, is finance. And so, we've started out remember, this is like the third time we've done commercialization. I call it the third wave of commercialization. The first wave didn't really happen. The second wave wiped us out. And here we are. And we don't know if we're riding a great wave or we're going to get wiped out. I mean, really, I am genuinely unsure of what's going to happen. But finance is one of the big problems. And one of the sources of difficulty is that we've developed an incredible model of finance that depends in large part on the venture capital model from Silicon Valley. And it works really well in a lot of industries. It's a tougher play when you look at the hardware side of space, because development timelines, even though I talk about how much shorter they are, they're still long for the venture capital. The expectations of profitability in aerospace industry. I mean, if you just look at aerospace industry, and if you're doing 10% margins, that's awesome, right? But most of the venture capital models need you to be generating 40 or 50% profit margins, operating margins. And that's hard to do in hardware. I won't say it's impossible. I've just never seen it yet, okay? And so that's a challenge. It's less of a challenge for the application side of it. I think the application side of it works well with a venture capital model. But if you start looking at that model, when you're talking about hardware, it's tougher for most companies. And so that's a big challenge. And I think the disparity between hardware and applications is another thing that worries me a little bit, because I see most of the money going into the application side, and I worry whether the applications are going to outstrip the hardware, the infrastructure that we really need in space.
Yeah, that's very relevant to the goals of aviation for the future, in terms of putting infrastructure in place that allow everyone to be utilizing space. And I'm glad you brought this distinction up between software and hardware. Can you talk a little bit about the goals of the Aldrin Space Institute and just educate us on that?
Mm-hmm. So ASI was formed primarily to, the first driving force was human exploration of Mars. And of course, that was my father's passion. And so we did a lot of work looking at cycling architectures, which was really, it's a super innovative architecture. Mars is not as popular now. And one of the things that we're doing right now is we're producing a volume on lunar habitats, which looks at, and Peter Eckert, who actually wrote, I think, one of the kind of foundational books and a couple of editions on lunar habitats, is kind of leading that. But we're putting together a Springer reference volume, which will have, we've got 50 authors working on it. It'll be about 1,000 pages. We hope to have it out this year. And so that's one of the things we're working on. But really the core of what ASI is doing is really embodied in the Center for Space Entrepreneurship. And so what we're doing at CSE, it's kind of, I'll say it's two things really. First is education. And so the core that we were built on is, it's a summer program. It's a graduate program, which is part of the Florida Tech catalog. So it's the same courses that you would be taking in a normal semester. But what we do is we put 4 different courses together to create a certificate. And the idea is that students that are working on an MBA, a master's in aerospace engineering, we've got an education student coming in this year that are working on a master's degree can get, it's literally, we do an entire semester of work over the summer on space. And so it's their classes in policy and law, commercial programs, really markets, entrepreneurship, where you develop a business concept, and technology and systems. And our faculty, I'm the only Florida Tech faculty, and I teach policy and law and markets. Greg Autry teaches the entrepreneurship program, and Angie Buckley and Chris Welsh from International Space University and Aerospace do the technology and systems. And we have about 20 speakers come in. This kind of, one of the great things is by doing it last summer, we learned that we can have the speakers and line them up for exactly the lecture that we want to have them come in. And that was a great lesson for us. But so you get a lot of interaction with people outside. And this past summer, we had a great program. Really looking forward to our next, this summer coming up. We've got a lot of students signing up. The other thing we do is research. And so we're working on a series of studies with the FAA, looking at commercial space industry emergence. We've got the two biggest studies are looking at the emergence of the small launch industry and the emergence of satellite constellations. And what we're doing is we're trying to take the rigor of academia and good academic theory, good data gathering, and bring that together with the practitioners, which I'm really more of a practitioner than an academic, and try and do something that takes a step beyond, kind of well-informed punditry, which is what sort of substitutes for analysis, to be honest, in the space industry, not to mention a lot of other industries. But we're trying to take it another step and pull together real databases, event databases that people can refer to, as well as basing what we're doing on good academic management theory. So those are, in a short, that's a short version of what we do.
That's great. It's interesting how you're anticipating the questions that are coming in on the chat. So just before you started to talk about the entrepreneurship program within your master's degree, Brian Hadley Reed asked, how does one teach entrepreneurship? It's not something you usually have in school. Can you talk, you're at the university master's degree level when people, might actually start companies. Is there something more earlier in the educational system that you would see benefit, where you find gaps in the students that you're interacting with at the graduate level where they could have covered some of that earlier?
So first thing is, there are a number of entrepreneurship programs that just sort of general entrepreneurship around the country. And so that's not hard to find. I think we are the only entrepreneurship program focused on space. And Greg, to be honest, is one of the very few professors who is a no kidding bona fide academic who teaches space entrepreneur's.
And a great guest on Blue Marble Week from a couple times ago. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, yeah, I'm almost surprised not to see him on the screen right now. At any rate, so here, that part of it is, in the broadest sense, the most important thing that you can teach an entrepreneur that we don't is it's really critical to understand the whole ecosystem. And most people come in and they understand a technology, or they may understand a niche of the market, and they've got a thing they want to sell, and they're sure that that thing will attract people. And that's almost exactly backwards. I mean, what you need to do is, first of all, you need to understand the whole environment that you're in. And it's not just, it's not just understanding what the dollars and cents are in the market. Who are your competitors? Who are the suppliers? When are you competing against your own suppliers? What does a regulatory environment look like? Where do you get government support? I mean, one of the early myths of space entrepreneurship was, the sort of libertarian myth, I think, that the government was not where you want it to be. Look, in the hardware business, there's a $400 billion space economy. About 87 billion of that economy is government, and government is almost all hardware. And the remaining commercial hardware side of the business is maybe $10 billion a year. And so 90% of hardware is bought by government. And if you're in the hardware business, you better be talking to government. So it's understanding the whole ecosystem. And part of the reason behind it is, most of the time, an entrepreneur goes out and they develop something, and it may be a perfectly good idea, but it's not what they end up doing. They end up doing plan B. And so investors are looking for, a great team of people that are really dedicated. They're also looking for people that understand the ecosystem, because they know the markets, is what they'll say, because they know whatever they're doing first isn't necessarily going to be the right answer. And the people that are going to be successful are the kind of people that understand the ecosystem better than their competitors and can find the market niche and develop products and services that perform tasks that people will pay money for, that customers will pay money for. So, that's kind of a long drawn out way to talk about it. It's really important in entrepreneurship to understand the whole system. And so what we do in our program is really take a step back in a lot of ways and say, what we're not doing is what you do in an accelerator. We're not doing what you do in sort of a Canvas program, which is go out there and just charge, go straight forward, get your customers and do something. And that's great. And there are a lot of people doing that. But we think it's important to step back and go, look, if you guys are going to be successful long-term, you really need to step back and understand everything that's going on and what the dynamics are. And you don't just hang out a sign and have people throw $1 billion valuation at you, although that seems to be happening right now. But
yeah, when there's euphoria over something like SpaceX and even Tesla carryover, right? The rise in Tesla shares, you can get blinded by the light pretty quickly and jump on board.
I like that. That's actually, I may use it for a title or something sometimes, because it's what happens with rocketry. You're blinded by the light.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the role of prizes in the commercialization of space? I know you've participated in some of those in the past.
Yeah.
How do you see that as a catalyst?
I think that prizes are overgeneralized. That it's, if you just look at it from a straight economic standpoint, it's difficult to understand how it works. Nobody made money off of Ansari X Prize, and we all, and it's wonderful because it did actually lead us down the path that we're moving down right now in suborbital tourism. I think that prizes work really, really well. And we know this with certain kinds of problems where you've got lots of solutions running around and kind of and it doesn't cost a lot to do it. And so prizes can work really well for something like that. It's a tougher sell when you start looking at really big things like going to the moon. Google Lunar X Prize, in part, it didn't work out because the US government decided they weren't going to the moon. And so, if you resurrected it again, it might work better. And it probably led to the success, I won't say this, the higher potential of success of CLIPS is probably, because I think CLIPS, initially, if you kind of look at the risk sharing and things like that, I would say this is a really dangerous program that industry is being asked to take on too much risk. But the fact that industry has already burned down a bunch of the risk because of the Google Lunar X Prize makes it look like a much more rational thing. So I think that, things like some of the centennial challenges that NASA does on fairly narrow technical things make a lot of sense. It's less obvious that the really big things are going to work. And so, NASA is getting a lot of stuff right. They are. And that's a really good thing. They're getting other things wrong, and we can talk about that. But
yeah, I've even had some conversations where having NASA as a customer is very different from having DoD as a customer in terms of the value, the risk, the entrepreneurial aspects.
I don't know if it's entrepreneurial, it's just different risk profile. So for example, ULA did really well providing exactly what the government, the Air Force and the NRO wanted. They wanted very low risk. And if you really dig into it and understand the customer, they were doing exactly what the customer wanted. But they were also doing things that were driving themselves into a very non-competitive position. And it's, for any of you that really want to pretend that, want to be an academic weenie, you can go read Clayton Christensen on this. And it's a brilliant discussion of this sort of insurgent incumbent dynamic that I think is rampant throughout space. But the point is, ULA understood its customer. Now NASA comes in, and NASA has a different risk profile and and ULA didn't meet that, particularly with cargo. I think with crew, it's obviously a lot closer, and ULA is part of that. But what NASA wants, and for different missions, the science people have a very different risk profile, and they look a lot like the Air Force. Right? They cannot tolerate failure. right? If a mission fails, it's going to be sometimes you can't even fly for another decade. I remember the Dawn mission. The launch window was the only window they had for 7 years. Mars, it's only every other year, right? And so you have to be very risk intolerant for that. But then for other science missions, it's really different. And it really comes down to what I'm saying is, you've got to understand where you live in this business. You got to understand the risk profile. You got to understand your customer and what the customer really needs, not necessarily what they say they need. And so that's what we teach.
That's wonderful. I'm going to visit the chat here. And Michael, did you have a question for Andy?
I wanted to go a little further, Dr. Aldrin, about the program itself. So,
Sure.
For folks that don't really know, it's a 6-week program. Tell us about those 6 weeks.
Okay, well, so let me actually give you a little bit of history. The first time we ran the program, it was a 6-week program, literally a full semester, 12 credit hours in 6 weeks. And so it was like 6 hours a day in class, and it was phenomenal. And I did that literally on purpose because I wanted to replicate some of the intensity of ISU's summer programs. The challenge was students couldn't keep up with the reading. And so what we originally intended to do last year was, and the first year, the 6 weeks we ran was at the Visitor Complex, Kennedy Space Center. You'd walk out of the classroom and you literally walked out underneath Atlantis. So it was an amazing experience. And that's phenomenal. And being on the Space Coast has lots of opportunities. So last year, our intention was to stretch it to 8 weeks, but do the first 2 weeks online so that students could do their reading, give them quizzes, make sure they've done their reading, then bring them in for 6 weeks. And we're actually going to kind of split the time between our offices at Florida Tech, which is a beautiful location for having lots of side discussions. We have lots of open classrooms. It was great. And then COVID hit. And so like any entrepreneur, we did plan B. Maybe it was plan C at this point. And so our plan for last year was we're going to do 8 weeks online and then 2 weeks at the Visitor Complex. We couldn't get to the Visitor Complex, so we ended up running the whole program online. We couldn't get there obviously because of COVID. So what we ended up doing was 8 weeks online. It was beautiful though, because by going online, as I already mentioned, we were able to bring in speakers when we wanted, to actually line up with the lecture. The other thing was we got students from all over the globe. So we had students from Africa, we had students from Europe, we had students from all over the US, we had a student from Sri Lanka. We got reach that we couldn't get otherwise. The other thing that was great for students was that some of the students, about half of them were working full-time. And they're young, they can do that. I cannot do that anymore, but they did. And the quality of the work we got out of them, there was one class where there were 3 or 4 papers that are absolutely publishable quality. I mean, they need to be kind of worked on, but they were publishable quality papers. And all of the classes I teach, you have to do a big research project and you have to present it to the class and you have to write it up because communications is important. It's a fundamental skill you got to have. And then finally, the thing that just completely blew me away is, so Greg's class, which is the entrepreneurship class, we had 4 groups which actually are taking their products to market, their business concept to market. Wow. One of which actually got a, I guess I have to be vague about, they got a pretty significant award, cash award in a business competition, an international business competition. And hopefully they'll go public with it. I mean, it's not enough to fund the whole business, but it's a good chunk of money for it's it would be a really great angel investment, but it was a competition. And so I'm totally stoked about that. And so I think last year's class was really exceptional. And I look at the students we're getting in this year, it's going to be a great class. So yeah, that's the program, Michael. I don't know if I can, I'll send you syllabi, ISUCSE.
Yeah, I put the link in the chat already.
You know better than me. Okay. But yeah,
what happens next?
Another few weeks of accepting students. We probably have a little bit of scholarship money yet, but it's all partial scholarships. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked about the program.
So is it going to be online this year? Is it going to be a hybrid? Are you thinking it's all going to happen in Florida?
No, okay, so we think that we hit on a really good model. 8 weeks online, 2 weeks in Florida. Okay. So it's going to start on the 18th of May, and then we'll run most mornings. There'll be 2 hours, maybe 3 some mornings of, a combination of guest lectures and class, and it'll be synchronous, and we'll have other group exercises and things that people can do on their own time, and then we'll come to the visitor complex for 2 weeks. We'll line up tours of the facilities. You can't have 2 weeks in Florida without a launch. So we'll put together some kind of event around the launch, which I think is a great opportunity, because particularly for entrepreneurs, because what happens at a launch is, all the senior engineers, managers, executives show up because they have to be there, because you can't possibly have a launch without the vice president of human resources there, right? And so they go to, and then everybody goes to the launch readiness review 2 days before launch. You go to the LRR, and if everything's good there, then you take a day off. And what we want to do is find ways of taking those people that are there for the launch anyway, and bring them together into just a really incredible sort of technical interface. We'll have students present things, faculty will present things they're working on, people that are coming down for the launch can talk about what they're doing. And just get people together that have, resources and problems with people that have solutions, and that's when innovation happens. It's a great opportunity in Florida that we haven't really taken enough advantage of, but it's a key element of what we did. The first year, we actually got to see a Falcon Heavy at night.
Oh, so envious of that one. I am very envious of that one.
There is a launch which isn't quite lining up. You might have to stay for a little while longer, but there's another mission that's coming up with the Falcon Heavy. I don't know if it's at night yet, but we're working on that. It's time to start figuring out exactly what's going to happen for that 2 weeks. But the 2 weeks is going to be magic, because it'll be the first time the students have gotten together. Right. We're actually going to invite the students from last summer to come.
Good.
To come and join us. And as I said, that was a phenomenal class, and they're looking forward to it, and they were, and I think it'll be magic.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it. We're going to try to do a ISU Alumni Association event there. By the way, there's 2 ISUers on this call right now, and there was Katrina Malagrana from earlier this morning. Okay. Spoke about her ISU experience. So
excellent. And I see one of my first year students on there. There's Alex.
Oh, you do? Oh, great.
Alex is on there. Alex, you have a question for me? Set me up with something.
I've been putting links in the chat for everyone's reference.
Have you? Oh, okay. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah,
Alex is one of our rock stars in the first year.
Right on.
Well, you're inspiring more than just graduate students here. We've got an 11th grader from the Philippines who is interested in enrolling in the Aldrin Space Institute, KL Waters, and also Adrian Kazo-Makadengdeng. Both are a little younger than your typical demographic and really excited about the space industry and wanting to get in. They're also in the comment. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so pay attention. There's more to come that will work. And also I should point out that I run the Aldrin Family Foundation, which is doing K through 12. We're mostly doing work in middle school, but we've got some really exciting programs coming out, one of which is sponsored by NASA, which is just going to be a really cool combination of really compelling videos with great lesson plans that are going to be, as I said, it's kind of directed more towards middle school, but we've got a lot of stuff coming.
Well, talk about that for a second, right? Because we just had Dr. Lance Bush 2 months ago, Challenger Center, also an ISU alum, right? Yep. To come in and talk about his programs, and you weren't on the call when the Foundation for the Future's executive director was on earlier this morning, but one of their primary goals is to figure out workforce development, and their phrase is from kindergarten to orbit. So how do you train the student to go from this person over in the Philippines? How do you get this 11th grader to be a space professional, however they define that, right? So please talk about
yeah.
that.
So first thing is, it helps if you get them sooner than 11th grade.
Okay.
I mean,
I think we're okay. I think anybody who's on this call is probably on.
I think they're right, and in a sense, they're not so much the audience for most of what we do. So our primary programs are built up on the idea of bringing the inspiration, the excitement of space into the classroom, but into the classroom, right? We do extracurricular stuff, but we like to make it something that is part of what the teachers are teaching to meet the standards that they need to meet. And it's not just STEM standards. It's also, we've got programs that we work on English language arts. Mm-hmm. And the fundamental thing is we've got these giant moon and Mars maps. And so we're putting the kids on the moon and Mars. And I'll talk about Mars for a second. So the thing that's so great about Mars is, because when we talk about Mars, we're talking about putting, maybe 50 people, some kind of a habitat on Mars, which is biologically more or less self-sustaining, but a permanent habitat. Sort of think about like the Emerson Scott Station at the South Pole. Not a million people like Elon, but 50 people that are there. But it's more people than you can really take there and bring home on a single mission. So they're going to be there for a long time. And if you're at Mars for a long time, you have to do everything on Mars that you do on Earth. But if you're doing it on Mars, it's a lot more exciting. And so, I joke that we can teach plumbing on Mars and get kids excited about it.
Yeah.
And so that's what we do. And so we've got our own lessons and things that we provide to the teachers. But typically what happens is we'll sit down with the district leadership and work on our programs to match what their standards are. Because every district, particularly the big districts, kind of have different ways of meeting standards. And so we work with them so they can bring it into the classrooms. And so the teachers can get excited about it. And when you let the teachers do things, amazing things happen. I'll tell one great story about this, which is we have a small district. We're actually in three of the largest districts in the country, but we're in a district in Cherokee County, South Carolina. It is 95-ish% free lunch, which means it's very underserved. Yep. It is very, very diverse. And we brought programs into third grade classes, and we had the help of Clemson University. Typically, we'd like to get, some kind of a local university working with us. And they work with the teachers and the kids. And we have nine different schools that in third grade that had the programs. And they kind of got together and they said, well, let's colonize Mars. And each one of these schools chose a location based on different things, different requirements, whether you're looking for life, you're looking for water, whatever. And what they came up with was like an intercolonial trading regime. And not only that, but they ended up talking about interplanetary relations. It was amazing. And I joke with my educational director that I could put him on that, and who's a brilliant guy, I could put him on that map for a week and he wouldn't think of what the kids came up with. So,
right.
We do those kinds of things. And, we've been doing online things under COVID, but we're not surprisingly really happy to be coming back into the classroom. And so we're building on some things to kind of move further. And one of the things that just gets me really, really, really excited is ThinSats. And, there's a school we're working with in the UK.
Sir, can you describe ThinSats? Because a lot of people on this call don't know what that is. Okay.
ThinSats are basically a single circuit board that's a satellite. I mean, in some cases, it's literally as simple as that. And you can build these things for, hundreds of dollars a piece. there's a school that we're working with in the UK, again, a really underserved area in the northeast of England. And they've got every kid in the class is actually building a satellite. They got hit by COVID, so they haven't launched them yet. But we've got cases where middle school kids are building satellites. Some of them are building CubeSats.
Awesome.
And so I'm looking at as like a growth opportunity, and there are people kind of working on these things already. But if you put together a multi-year program in high school where you start learning about space early on, and then you maybe in the first year you develop a thin set, but by the time you finish, and you can launch these things incredibly cheaply, right? Mm-hmm. You put 250 of them together in a 6U CubeSat, and all of a sudden the launch costs start to come down. But anyway, you end up with a competition, and some winning team actually gets to build and launch a CubeSat that's doing real things. And if you think about, keeping kids in school, what could be more compelling than the opportunity to say, look, when I graduate, I'm gonna have my own satellite in space. And so that stuff gets me really excited.
I've been at this 20 years. I don't have a single asset in space that has my name on it, right? I mean, I can't even imagine what that would have been like for me as a kid.
Yeah.
All right. We have to wrap this up. I really apologize, because I would keep going with this conversation all day long. I'm going to turn it back over to Lee. We're going to keep that conversation going. Just so you know, in just this, 49 people on this call, you've got a sixth grade teacher who is teaching high capacity students, and you've got a professor from Cal Poly. And then you've got another nonprofit that's doing STEM education. So this topic wasn't what I had planned on talking about. We should probably bring it back just to do this one. But sure. Super glad that you're here for this. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thank you very much. It's a really, really interesting time in space.
It is. Okay. Lee, over to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Michael and Andy.